Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. We note this morning no good morning greeting from Luttrell. So if anybody knows the whereabouts of Luttrell, please do check. Also check.
Let me just write this down on my notepad. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm keeping track.
And if you're out and about and you see the crashing of a vehicle you don't recognize and there are non-human biologic remains there, grab us a DNA sample so that we can make sure that wasn't Luttrell. Luttrell, you're lost in the cosmos. E.T., come home. Hey, so Hunter Biden. I have been doing my level best to ignore the Hunter Biden issues and story. And the reason for it, he seems like a sad metaphor for our times. A middle-aged, crack-addicted, prostitute humping son of a president who doesn't seem to have much going for him other than a glitzy last name. And he's now constantly in the news and he's become sort of tabloid fodder. But yesterday's events in federal court caught my attention. And I think there's a major problem in his case. And I think he's necessarily going to have to go to prison. And so, and Matthew Kyle steps up and says, hey, Luttrell is overrated. Good morning from me. And we're like, yeah, I'm loving that. And good morning from Freedom Lover as well. And Luttrell, you just go ahead and ride that alien vehicle into Deep Space Nine. And when you come back, don't try to tell us you've been abducted by aliens and you found the meaning of life and that Hunter Biden is really God's only son. Don't even try that on that smack on Law and Legitimacy. We're not going to listen. But let's talk about Hunter Biden. A while ago, it was announced that Hunter had entered a plea deal with the United States government, ending years of investigations. And the investigations resulted in an unusual set of charges. There's Luttrell. Good morning. Okay, call off the Air Force. We don't need to search the unfriendly skies. Luttrell is here.
Look, the LA aliens have reported for duty. That's the only UFOs that we need to worry about is all the live LA aliens in chat, right?
Mike, we don't want to take note of the fact that he was 2 minutes late this morning. Okay, so erase that note to his file. But back to Hunter Biden. All right.
Uh-oh, we got both angry dogs sitting together this morning. I can hear them barking from here. What's going on, gentlemen?
Hunter Biden, he gets charged with not filing tax returns, and he gets charged with an unusual handgun charge. Let's talk about the relationship of those two charges to the plea he entered, and then what happened in court and why you're hearing it here first on Law and Legitimacy.
That's right.
It's virtually certain that he's going to prison.
What day was it that we streamed and discussed this in particular? And you talked, Norm, about how not just uncommon, but improbable it is for someone in his position facing a felony gun charge to receive 0 prison time.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about the two charges and let's deal with the easy one first. And the first is the gun charge. So Hunter, in order to possess a weapon, had to state under oath that he was neither drug or alcohol addicted. And so he did. But then he went out and wrote an autobiography talking about his crack addiction at the time. So he's got some splaining to do, and the splaining is he lied. And so he should not have been in possession of that gun at all. So it's a little bit different than a gangbanger walking into Walmart saying, I'm here for my 5-finger discount, everybody down. But it's still a federal offense, and it's a gun offense. And guns are typically a big deal, especially from this White House, and especially from the federal government. So he was offered something called pretrial diversion. And in a pretrial diversion program, a person agrees to abide by certain conditions, no further offenses, drug treatment, screening and treatment as necessary, whatever the terms of the plea deal call for, in exchange for which, upon successful completion of those conditions, their charge would be expunged and they'll have no criminal record. In 30 plus years of practicing criminal law, I've only gotten pretrial diversion, I think once, maybe twice, and never for a gun case, and both with great effort. So that was one charge. Hunter was given a sweetheart deal. Then, of course, to me, the real Houston, there's a problem here issue is the tax evasion. For a 2-year period, it was reported in the press, Hunter had $1.5 million in income, and he didn't file tax returns. Now, you've heard me say it before, and bears noting for those of you who have wild ideas of tax planning, don't file a false tax return. That's a felony. If you've got issues with your tax returns, don't file one at all, because that's just a misdemeanor. And when the feds catch you, you can negotiate an amount of taxes that is owed, and an agent will do a report in lieu of a return, and you pay that amount. And that appears to be what Hunter did. But here's the question that was begged. How does a ne'er-do-well, middle-aged crack addict lying on his form to get guns, cavorting with prostitutes, and filming himself about it, because that struck him as a genius move? How does a guy like that make $1.5 million in 2 years? It wasn't because he sings well. It wasn't because he's an athlete. His endorsements don't mean anything except perhaps in whorehouses and crack dens. And so what did he do? Well, the suspicion is, and the growing suspicion is, he was an influence peddler. He was out on international markets peddling access to his father, and he did so on behalf of foreign governments, raising a suspicion that he violated an old act. I think it was passed in the 1930s, the Foreign Agents and Registration Act.
1938.
And if you are working on behalf of, or doing work for a foreign government, definitely not a quarterback, Matt says. If you have to register, and that's an important national security.
Back money.
So why does this matter? Because at a federal sentencing, relevant offense conduct is always important. Now let's talk about plea bargaining. The overwhelming majority of criminal cases in the United States are resolved by way of plea bargaining, some 97% in the federal system. That means when a person is charged, they're going to negotiate with the government the terms and conditions of a guilty plea. 95%, I believe, is the average on the state side. And there's a huge difference between what goes on in the federal courts and what goes on in many state courts. And I want to use as an example a trip to the used car lot to explain it all. Nobody wants to enter a guilty plea. It's like a trip to the used car lot. You got to go, you need something, and you're looking for the best you can get. And so what do you want to know? How many miles on the car? How many owners? What's the condition? Is it roadworthy? Are you going to stand behind it if something goes wrong in the first 12,000 miles, et cetera, et cetera? And then you negotiated a price. And in a successful trip to the used car lot, you pay money for a car, and you know what you're driving. You drive it off the lot. You've purchased a car knowing what you're getting for your money. In federal plea bargaining, you never know what you're getting in exchange for your plea. Whatever understanding the parties may have, the government and the defense lawyer, it's always the judge who makes the final decision. So it's in effect an open plea bargaining regime. Sure, you will plead guilty to not filing a tax return, but you don't plead guilty to the penalty. And people are explicitly warned of the time they enter their plea that it is the judge who decides the penalty and not anyone else. That the government may have made an estimate, that the defense may have made an estimate, but both estimates may be wrong. And if the trial court, the judge imposing the sentence, disagrees with both the government and the defense counsel, you can't withdraw your guilty plea. Even if you've been told, as Hunter was, this is going to be a walk, baby. We got this. Don't worry about it. The government and we agree. If the judge disagrees, Hunter can't take his plea back. And we got a powerful signal yesterday that the judge is going to disagree, but for a reason I haven't seen reported in the mainstream press. So you're going to get a little bit of something here that you haven't gotten elsewhere. And the reason is relevant defense conduct. How is it? So a person who enters a guilty plea in the federal system is turned over to a pretrial service officer, who then does a lengthy study of the person and the nature of the crime, the circumstances of the crime, their character, their education, their history, their family history, and so on and so forth, and prepares a report that could range from 20 to 40 pages long for a judge to read, for the judge to consider as she imposes sentence. One factor that any inquiring mind is going to want to know is, how did Hunter make that money? And that's going to be relevant offense conduct. Now, he wasn't charged with FARA. He wasn't charged with doing anything illegal. But you got to ask yourself, how does this guy make $750,000 a year, in effect, over 2 years to acquire $1.5 million? And then where does he get the money to pay it? And the answer is relevant offense conduct. He had to generate income to owe taxes on it to avoid paying those taxes. And that's going to be pertinent to the nature and circumstances of the offense. It's going to be pertinent to the sentence imposed. And I believe in this case, the judge is going to want to know where he made the money. And when she finds that out, she could sentence him to the maximum for these charges because she doesn't like the answer. Let me give you a horrible example, but it's a true one. This is the notion of acquitted offense conduct. Many years ago, my former partner, John Williams, and I had a case in federal court where a young man was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and drug trafficking. And it was 4 or 5 guys standing around on a street corner at a drug deal, and somebody got shot to death. So the feds charged all the people there with conspiracy to commit murder and drug dealing. The jury acquitted our client of conspiracy to commit murder because, candidly, he couldn't tell what happened other than the fact that somebody got shot to death. But everybody was doing drugs there, selling. So he was convicted of the drug offense. Under federal sentencing guidelines, that is basically a large cookbook that tells judges what factors they need to consider when imposing sentence. His sentence should have been somewhere on the order of 12 to 15 years. But instead, at sentencing, the judge imposed the statutory maximum, which I think was 20 at that time. And the stated reason for it was his involvement in the murder. And we said, wait a minute, didn't the jury just say not guilty of that murder? So what was he involved? What was the level of involvement? And the court said it's relevant offense conduct. I've concluded that he was involved by a lesser standard. The jury said, it wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but at sentencing, the court needs to only find things by a preponderance of the evidence. That is, that it's more likely than not he's getting the max. We took an appeal to the Second Circuit, the federal appellate court in New York City. Didn't go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Second Circuit held that acquitted offense conduct can be considered by a trial judge at the time of sentencing. So all of this is really, really bad news for Hunter. And what's worse is the federal government and his lawyers got caught playing a game. In the plea agreement that they entered, they checked off the following boxes, as it were, or relied on statutes for pretrial diversion to try to rope in a potential FARA claim, Foreign Agent Registration Act claim, when no one was looking and the judge caught him. Here's what I mean. Under the pretrial diversion agreement, the government agreed not to prosecute him for any more offenses related to the guns if he successfully completed the program. But they left off the bit about related to the guns in the agreement, and they agreed not to prosecute him for any offenses related to the plea. But he pled to 2 counts. The first count being the tax count, and that was unrelated to the pretrial diversion. So the judge looked at this and she said, I don't think I can do this. I don't think you can do this. And the lawyers looked at one another and said, we didn't mean to do this, or basically something like that. The government basically said they're still investigating him for FARA charges, including FARA. And the defense lawyer said, you can't do that. That's not part of the plea. And at that point, the judge looked at them all as though they were a bunch of unruly law students who hadn't done their homework and said, we got to regroup and we got to reconsider. So the bottom line is the federal government got caught playing footsie with Hunter's lawyers. And Hunter's lawyers got caught playing footsie with the feds. And now Hunter is in the crosshairs because he's acknowledged that he has not filed his returns. He's acknowledged that he lied on a form in order to purchase a gun in violation of federal law. And he now is going to be required to explain in a formal proceeding how he made all that money. And there isn't going to be a legitimate answer. And so Hunter is either going to take the fifth as to how he made that money and get hurt for it at sentencing, because this isn't the court has a justifiable reason to try to understand his sources of income. And so my prediction is, and you heard it here first, it's July 27, 8:14 in the morning, the year of our Lord, or somebody's Lord, 2023. Hunter Biden's going to jail. And he's going to pull a sentence of somewhere between 6 and 15 months. And you're thinking, still not bad. Well, you ain't no president's son. They promised him a walk, but I think now that the jig is up and this has been exposed as a little bit of sharp dealing among lawyers who are normally not in bed with one another, Hunter has no choice but to prepare for a jail cell.
So lawyer Will says, what? You can be punished for acquitted conduct in a criminal case? That's insane.
Well, it's not. Yes, lawyer Will, it is insane. I agree with you. And I'm as shocked by it today as I was 20, 25 years ago when it happened. But the law is that among the factors that a court considers at sentencing is the nature and circumstances of the crime and the character of the defendant. So in this case, in the narcotics case, The men were gathered together at a street corner to engage in a narcotics transaction. Gunfire erupted. Somebody died. There was insufficient evidence in the jury's mind to conclude that the defendant, our client, had shot and killed the other man. But from the court's perspective, he was in close proximity to the death and engaged in conduct that led to the death, because we all know that drug deals can turn violent. And that was good enough for government work. From our perspective, it was an outrage. But Lawyer Will, the court probably justified this conclusion by saying he wasn't punished for the acquitted offense conduct because the statutory maximum for the drug offense was 20 years, whereas murder would have been life. So all the court did was reject a lesser guidelines sentence for the drug case and sentenced him to the maximum on the drug case, to 20 years. So he caught the maximum sentence for the crime of conviction when the court considered of conduct for which he was acquitted, but he wasn't independently punished. In other words, the sentence didn't go beyond what was authorized for the drug deal. It is what it is. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm not saying I think it's right, but I'm saying that if we live in a regime where this sort of reasoning is permissible, it is difficult for me to accept that there is any outcome in the Biden case that does not result in formal hearings, factual findings on how he earned that money. And the lawyers, as good as they are, his dad spent top dollar to get top rate Washington, D.C. defense lawyers, including Abby Lowell. As good as these guys are, they screwed up in this case. They thought that they were smarter than the judge, and they relied on their relationships, long-standing relationships with the federal government, to try to piece together a plea deal. And the judge saw through it. And now I believe the centerpiece of the Biden litigation will not be his failure to file a tax return or his lie on a form in order to purchase a handgun. It's going to be, where did you make that money?
Absolutely.
And that's the one question everybody wants answered. And if I'm the sentencing judge, he's not getting sentenced until I get an answer to that.
Well, and the day before, I brought this up before, and Barry and Dawn, we will get to your question/comment in just a moment. But I brought this up to you before the stream, Norm, that the day before there was this dust up with the clerk's office at the court and allegations that Hunter Biden's lawyers faked being someone they were not in order to have an amicus brief that contained testimony from another IRS whistleblower within that from the court's docket. And the judge at that point required that they show cause why they shouldn't be held in contempt and worse. And they came up with some sort of response. And then the next day is when this stuff fell apart in court. And I wonder, people being people, humans being human, if the judge at that point started to begin scrutinizing what was going on in this case procedurally a bit more than she otherwise would have, based on that faux pas from the day prior. Maybe it's irrelevant. Maybe those two things don't live in the same universe, but it's hard to think that didn't at least color the perspective of the judge prior to those parties entering the courtroom yesterday.
Well, I mean, it might have motivated her to take a closer look. But candidly, we called this the day the plea was entered. We talked about relevant offense conduct and started asking, where do you make that money? And, to me, this was a foreseeable question that was unavoidable. I don't care how cute the plea agreement was. I don't care how cozy the relationship between the lawyers is. When you've got a guy up there who avoided filing tax returns for 2 years because presumably he didn't want to pay taxes on his $1.5 million in income. That's an extraordinary amount of money. Most people don't earn anywhere near that. And if I'm a judge, I want to know how this guy made that money. And does the manner in which he made it reflect in part his unwillingness to file tax returns, because it might be consciousness of guilt or circumstantial evidence of another crime, to wit, failure to register as a foreign agent. Now, the whistleblower stuff and all these suggestions that Hunter and his dad are on the take or are on the payroll from foreign governments, I do my best to.
The whistleblower stuff is mostly, I don't know that it's directly about President Joe Biden and or Hunter Biden take from foreign governments, although that certainly exists in the ether that is this matter. To me, it was more about the build up to this and the Department of Justice claiming that, that there was total, isolation of this case, that independent prosecutorial decisions were made, and that there was no undue influence or other pressure applied in this case. And that to me is really where my interest lies.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
If you're having to have a public relations campaign to assure people that the DOJ that we've talked about ad nauseum on the stream and other contexts is not engaging in any sort of funny business with one of the most high profile people on the planet under the microscope, it's just, you got to be joking, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, now we'll get some answers, and I, the lawyers, I think, are getting the kid gloves treatment here. To me, this is, altering, trying to remove things from a court docket, misrepresenting your identity to a court officer to accomplish some other ends. That goes to the very heart of the integrity of the profession, and a lawyer who does that gets a sit down, as far as I'm concerned. It's one thing to make a mistake; it's another thing to lie about who you are in order to accomplish something else. And if that's what they've done, that's right up there with the whole Chat GPT thing.
Absolutely.
And an independent duty of candor toward the tribunal. For you non-lawyers, it might shock you to learn lawyers take trainings, and there's a code of ethics, and lawyers take training in this. And that code says that there are several paramount duties of lawyers. First is a duty of loyalty to your client. Then they're in the criminal context, and even in the civil context, there's a duty of zealous advocate. Be your client's spokesman. Do everything that the law can require, permits rather, to achieve your client's ends or objectives. But third, candor toward the tribunal. Everything depends on candor. Everything depends on the character of the participants. And if we've got people lying about who they are to accomplish their strategic ends, that's a rabbit hole of infinite depth. And the bottom line is not a good one. So, Hunter, pack your bags.
Well, so before we move on from this topic, Norm, there are several people in the chat here on YouTube that are asking about the pardon power of the president in relation to this matter. So, in general, pardon power of the president, what state does a case need to be in for the pardon power to be validly exercised? And is it likely to occur in this case?
The second question is a political question, and boy, kaboom, if that happens, all bets are off. I don't know. I just don't know what's going on with Joe Biden. As to the stage, he could be pardoned at any point. I mean, you'll recall when Gerald Ford famously pardoned Richard Nixon in anticipation of charges arising from the whole Watergate crisis. And his view was the country needed to heal, needed to move on, needed to put this distraction behind him. I'm sure that those close to the president are thinking a similar page can be turned here. But I don't know. So the pardon power is the president's. A person doesn't need to be convicted. They don't even need to be indicted. He can simply say, I'm issuing a pardon for all charges that could or did arise from his failure to file tax returns and or his employment and or his possession of a weapon. The problem is the more specific he gets, the more venal he looks. And he can't really say, I'm giving my son a pardon of any and all federal offenses that he may or did or could have convicted or conceivably could have been charged with, or may even have done from the date of his birth until yesterday at noon. How's that going to look? So, I don't, it would be political suicide in my view for Biden to do it, but he has the power to do so.
Matthew Kyle's trying to get ahead of us here in the stream, saying, anybody see Mitch McConnell freeze up at the podium yesterday? I guess we can transition to that if you'd like, Norm.
Yeah, you did, didn't you? What did you see, Mike?
I did. So I watched this video, and I'll see if I can pull it up on the screen here in just a moment.
Did he go into was he doing a Joe Biden impersonation? Was it a stand-up comedy routine? I mean, he was going to be Joe Biden falling down airplane steps or falling up airplane steps.
I'll put this on the screen, and this still picture here tells the entire story. This is exactly what he looked like for about 20 seconds standing at the podium in front of the full press gallery. And it was at this point that he's got people around him kind of coming to his assistance because he was in the middle of talking and he just froze. Just like this, staring blankly into the abyss. Now he took a break and he came back and did a Q&A. and the reports were that he was sharp and et cetera, right? But the story with this is, I think, larger than just this one instance with Mitch McConnell, or larger than Mitch McConnell generally. I call him Cocaine Mitch because we remember how much of a force he was, a political force for, and I'm ambivalent as to good or bad, but a political force he was during the latter stages of the Trump presidency, right? But he's now 81 years old. Nancy Pelosi, I think, is outranks him. She may be 83.
I thought she was 86, but maybe that's because I want her 86. I don't know.
But there is a larger legitimacy question here, I think, that needs to be asked, and we don't have to spend so much time on this because this gets into a lot of just conjecture and tough to anchor it in law. But the fact is, there aren't any term limits. I'm not even taking a position that I believe that there should be term limits. I am just wondering culturally what it is about the game of federal politics that keeps people in this position until they are really at the doorstep of the end of their life, right?
I mean, is it hard? That to me, that's not hard to imagine. Maybe because I'm so much closer to the end of mine than you are to yours, at least actuarially speaking. But power insight is additive, and you've heard of the 10,000 hour phenomena. To really master something, you've got to spend 10,000 hours at it, and once you've mastered it, the world becomes suddenly so much more interesting. The routine problem, the problems that were once complex become routine, and you're able to capture more and more. And there is a certain something called insight and/or wisdom that comes of experience. And so I think it's an additive effect. The problem is you reach a point of diminishing returns where the machine simply breaks down and the mind and the body and the spirit and the will begin to dissolve and prepare you for your inevitable greeting with infinity, with death. And so how do we screen out those who are doddering into incompetence from those who are at the peak of their game? I don't know. And term limits would be one way to do it. But yet there are 81-year-olds who are sharp as a tack. Cocaine Mitch doesn't seem to be one of them. And it seems to me that he probably, I'm guessing, has had recent trips to the Walter Reed Medical Center. And there probably is a neurological report on his deficits right now and what's going on. Reportedly, he's been falling a lot recently. He's looking aphasic. That is, he's losing the ability to react coherently in space and time with those around him. And it does raise good questions, Mike. The question is, how do you get a power addict to say, one more day? How do you get him to say it's time to turn in the gavel? I've done enough. I don't know how to do that.
The incentive on the back end there must be, as I think about how much of one's life he or she is giving to this, and the power and influence that comes with it must be great enough that it activates some extra level of give a shit, right? For lack of a better term, right? And what does that say about how power and influence has been consolidated in American politics over the last 40 or 50 years, right? That we have reached a point in time where, I think about a time for not only Gen X, but millennials like a Vivek Ramaswamy to begin entering politics at the local, state, and federal levels in a serious way. And I believe that to be true with every fiber of my being. I think that there is a service angle to all of this, and it is time for us to start seeing competent millennials and Gen Xers taking control in the reins of politics. And I say competent because AOC, anyway.
Because AOC might not meet the competence threshold.
And when we have an example like this, it couldn't be more clear, right? That there is no real succession plan that involves some sort of changeover of political power. And the question is, well, why not? And is it because the incentive structure is so bastardized on the back end that anyone who takes an honest look at it says, whoa, this explains way more than I ever really wanted to know about how things work and how the sausage is made with respect to the current state of the United States Republic.
I mean, as always, my thoughts turn quotidian, and simple. End of life decisions. The concept of agency is what's really involved, and so the law can easily discern people who are totally insane, the psychotics. It's a little more difficult in a criminal context to determine who is or isn't competent to assist in their own defense. In the civil context, the functional equivalent of these decisions would be conservatorship petitions? At what point do you reach a decision that somebody is incapable of managing their own affairs? And then you go to a probate court to have somebody substituted as the conservator of a person who is incapable of managing their own affairs. And there's a gray zone between being at the top of your game and being out and out incapable. Mitch seems to be in that gray zone right now. When he becomes out and out incapable, well, then he'll have a conservator. But how bad off do you have to be? How many times do you have to stumble? How many planes do you have to fall up, as it were, before you are rendered incapable? Probate courts make that judgment, and they're difficult judgments.
Well, and Lawyer Will says he offers incumbent advantage in elections keeps people in office. I obviously agree to that. Haley B. Shaw says Convention of States, and
there we go. We haven't talked about that in a long time.
Yeah, we haven't.
Maybe it is time. Maybe it is time, and it may be that there is an appetite for an upper limit. It may be that we want to say that unless and until we can engineer the perfect human that can live forever, as it were. Your sell by date is 80. It's funny. I have several friends who are in their 80s, and one was a dynamo for decades in the law, and he is suddenly backing out just on grounds that he doesn't have the energy for it anymore. It's too complex, too complicated. Another guy who is almost the same age as he is still at it, and he claims that he's lost a step, but when you see him in action in a courtroom, he still looks plenty capable to me. And so the danger with a bright line rule is you're going to punish the guy who's capable to protect us from the guy who's incapable, and maybe to protect us from somebody like Mitch, who's rapidly becoming incapable but was too proud to acknowledge it. And maybe we just have to bite the bullet and say, hey, age is everyone's enemy, and there comes a point where you just have to surrender. Maybe that's necessary. Conference of this.
To that point, In the Cloud says the reality is that at 81, even if someone is sharp, that could quickly turn. And I think that's the point that you're also making as well. T-Girl says we're glossing over Dianne Feinstein. No, we're not. It's just that's another one in that geriatric bag, that octogenarian bag. Pete Atkinson, rare sighting. Good morning, sir, to you.
Good morning, Pete. Good morning, Pete. Good morning, Pete, and your twin brother, Repeat. Let's keep an eye on Cocaine Mitch as he stumbles, and maybe he'll be rescued by a UFO. Look, I know we're over time here today, but I just gotta say this. Non-human biologic material. Okay, fine. There are lots of animals out there. Who knows? Tell us what it is. Did you discover a life form without DNA? Now I'm listening, okay? But this idle chatter about, unidentified aerial phenomena or UFOs or is ET out there or whatnot, I still, am going to resort to Fermi's paradox. In the infinity of space and time, we're the only life form like us, self-conscious, filled with longing. And ladies and gentlemen, I just don't think it's irresponsible to suggest as an article of faith that guides my behavior. That's because we're created, not made. We are not simply function of random bits of matter that came together one afternoon in infinity ago by chance and decided, whoa, I think we'll become human. And the longing that fills your heart, the desire for a destiny, the questions you raise about the nature and destiny of your own life or of the species, these aren't random events that have no answer and make us possessors of the human stain and inevitable dissatisfaction. In other words, we didn't evolve to the point of this wonderful imperfection, which we call ourselves. I think a better and more satisfying explanation is we're created, not made. And at the point of our creation, we decided to become gods unto ourselves. And in so doing, we followed our own nest and our own lives. And we all know and understand the reality of sin. Those of us who are lucky enough to have stumbled our toe against ourselves enough and have been open to the call of grace, I think sometimes get the intimation that there's more in the world. And perhaps the good book was right, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, not in order to create theological mysteries that are going to fill divinity students' heads with midnight ruminations, but for the simple fact that you can wake up in the morning and say, it is good to be alive, and I am grateful, and I am thankful to the Creator who made me so. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time looking around in infinity for somebody just like me, because I don't think there is. Newsflash to the UFO people. You're not alone in the universe, but you're alone with yourself. take a moment, be open to the possibility of grace, and the other you'll find isn't an alien. It might be the God who created you.
Beautiful. I'm not going to do anything to that. Norm, thank you as always for ending the show with a philosophical bang, and photography obviously sees that as well. I'll just say that we are live every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. on Rumble Video, YouTube Live, and X Live, formerly known as.
So, I mean, does this mean that we're like XXX porn stars now if we're on X? You used to tweet when we were on Twitter. What do you do on X? You X?
You express. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. All right.
Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow morning. Same time, same bat channel, as they say. Thank you for all of the interest in our potential fantasy football league over on Rumble. I didn't say anything about it on YouTube, but Norm and I have decided that we are going to launch a Law and Legitimacy Fantasy Football League this year. So if you would like to get in touch with us, email pattispodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @LawPodDaily. Send us a note, either in a direct message or just tweet at us. And we're trying to gauge interest. We've got a couple of our loyal viewers who are going to work in concert to help us build that out. And depending on the interest level, everyone, we may do multiple leagues and figure out an interesting scoring dynamic such that we don't have to, limit it too much. But Norm is interested. I've already given him a couple of resources to start priming himself for how it works. I think I'm experienced enough and have enough support here that we could do something really fun. So if you're interested in a fantasy football league this season, let us know. I've got at least 5 names from the Rumble chat this morning here. So we'll make sure to put that into action. We'll see you tomorrow, Norm.
All right. Ciao. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
See you later.